make the switch.
And here we are. Les Schaffer, would you like to introduce yourself and your work or the workshop? Anything?
Uh, I can do that.
Go ahead.
Um, br Briefly, my name is Les Schaefer. As I think Eric said, I am living in and have lived for a long time in Richmond, Virginia. Those of you with really, really good ears can pick up the New York City in my accent still because it never goes away. Um, I've been a working storyteller, well, for a really long time. And I encourage all of you, if you're in, don't let it go. Keep working, keep improving. Uh, I don't know. I don't often know about how stories heal others. I mean, I feel like it does, but I do know how healing it is for us as storytellers. I know that personally. Uh, I do a lot of tandem storytelling with a storytelling partner, Judith Honesty, and sometimes it feels a little weird for me to be up here by myself, but we juggle it. Today is a hard day. It's turning out to be a very hard day to do a workshop on doing historical stories. I feel like right now, I woke up this morning and made the mistake of turning on National Public Radio and uh, being drowned in war news. That
Here we go. Go ahead.
Okay, and now I completely lost track of where it was. Uh, but we are the ones who are going to carry the story, who have to collect the stories, keep them, figure out how to pass them on. The world, your children, your grandchildren, or great grandchildren, people you've never met or never heard of, are going to hear about how the world is, how the world was through our stories. Um, and I think it probably not a bad idea for us to get better at doing it and to be aware of what we're doing. And Eric has disappeared, and I wanted to start my slide pack. Um, okay, well, we'll talk about it when he gets back. I Let me start with not a story, but maybe a story about a story. Eric, can you put up the first slide, please? And we'll do.
Yes.
And I assume people know how to do share screen.
Well, I'm doing the share screen.
Okay, okay,
Is this the slide you
yeah,
want?
yeah. Uh, History is a story well told. I wish I knew who that quote is from, but I don't know. Um, when I'm doing creating stories and thinking about historical stories, I like starting with I'm a kind of a visual person. I start with visuals frequently. I put up four visuals here on this first slide. The top one is one I grew up with. This is 1945 Grant in Times Square in New York City. It's the day the war with Japan, World War II ended, and a sailor from the U.S. Navy apparently it turns out has grabbed a young woman. She looks like she might be a nurse, but it turns out, getting your history right, she wasn't exactly a nurse. She was some sort of medical technician, but she's always identified as a nurse. And he gives her this magnificent smooch. And Alfred Eisenstadt, who is a great photographer, and I actually knew him uh, briefly and in a very prescribed way, but a very neat man. He's there and takes the picture for Life magazine, which was, many of you probably don't, if you're young, you don't know. Life magazine was our CNN, Fox News, NBC News, da 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 da. We got probably most of our news from publications like Life magazine, and Life magazine's thing was to tell the story in pictures. And this captures a moment, and you could fall into that picture and do it makes a great story. The bottom two pictures, well, one is the first man on the moon, Neil Armstrong. I end up putting, I forget whether, I think it's Neil. I put into a story about my grandmother going grocery shopping for her Sabbath stories, for her Sabbath meals in the early 1940s when I was a child. And Neil becomes the kind of one of the endpoints of the story because this woman who grew up in a unnamed little shtetl, little village somewhere out on the steppes between Ukraine and Russia, she lives long enough to see this man hit a golf ball on the moon. And that's kind of incredible and a story that needs to be told. The other picture, woman Florence Owens Thompson, migrant farm worker, has her picture taken by Dorothea Lange in 1936, the year before I was born. Um, and she's a migrant farm worker in very hard times in the midst of the Great Depression. She's also the mother of seven, and she's a survivor. And again, another great story. The picture in the middle, some of you may recognize Mahatma Gandhi on the famous Salt March. And I forget the date of that, when Gandhi walks, what was it, 300 miles? I got that right. Um, to the sea and gets a handful of salt and ends up breaking the British monopoly on salt in the Indian subcontinent. Um, I've always thought that was a great story, and I've tried to tell it. And I end up telling that story by putting it together with another story that's fictional, a little old magazine story from probably the 1930s, um, about an apocryphal time when Mahatma Gandhi hits a home run in a baseball game for the New York Yankees. And that sort of becomes a metaphor for the Salt March. But this is, all different ways of approaching historical stories. Can we get the next slide, Eric,
I
please?
must say, Les, I've always been a little concerned about that kissing picture. Uh,
Ah,
he's very exuberant, but I'm a little concerned for her.
yes, and we should be, although I don't think anything untoward happened other than the kid, which is kind of an assault. But um, you have to remember the time, and this is going to be important when if we're doing stories from history past, we're doing them from our time. I have vivid memories of being in Times Square during World War II and during times of celebration for this or that. And the square the area is packed with people, many in uniform, and it's a different time. And there were for a brief time, I'm not excusing it, but there were different rules. Um, and that's just what it was, for better or for worse. Um, I'd be curious. I should have asked my father. I didn't. He was in the Navy in World War II, and he came back to, I think, Los Angeles he was on a boat, not even a ship, on a boat for 3 years in the Pacific Ocean, had a horrible time. But he comes back to Los Angeles. And what was his first day or two in Los Angeles? What was that like? And he would never talk about it. But yeah, we're right to be concerned. Um, and I think we have to remember that their time's not our time. We're going to tell stories. I'm looking up here on slide two and some of the caricatures of some historical figures, and think about the times that they lived in and some of the acts they participated in. Um, and we're right to be. This is how we grow, and this is how we learn. Um, and they're going to look at our time and think of the concern in 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, what are people gonna, what are people's concerns going to be about our time? Um, okay, so what's your historical interest? Um, can we quick? We've got a few, not a great crowd. We can do this. What's one of the most memorable stories you've ever heard in a word or two? And either say it out loud or put it on the chat. I would go back and, one of the most memorables, I remember hearing the news of Pearl Harbor on the radio in 1942. That moment has stayed with me my whole life. What about other folks?
For me, the summer of love,
The Summer of Love. Okay.
1968, I believe it was,
Yeah.
especially in San Francisco. And on the ground, there were a lot of unfortunate things because there was no infrastructure for so many people to be there. But for the ideal that it represented, it's an important moment for me.
Hmm. And it's juxtaposed, the Summer of Love is juxtaposed against the transition to the Nixon administration, we're beginning, we're stuck in the Vietnam War, and it's all it. One of the things when you're doing history is which piece of it are you going to talk about? Because there's always a counterpoint happening around whatever the event is. What about other folks? What story sticks with you? Oh, come on, folks. Was anybody in India at the time of independence, the moment of independence? You would have been very young.
That's 1947.
1947. Yeah, I was
So
10 years old.
somebody would have to be about 80 years old for that.
Yeah, yeah, yes, yes.
Oh, but so does this moment have to be during our lifetime or just a moment that's very
No,
strong in
good
our,
question.
yeah,
Thank you, Eric.
yeah.
No, pick a point in history. You know, I don't know about you. Sometimes I live in 1747 or 1300 AD. We have moments all over the place. Well, we're going to come back to that. I'm going to move. Oh, somebody, Janet, who lives about 15 miles from me in Sanson, Virginia. Uh, the moon landing. Yeah, I mean that. Talk about a moment in history. 9/11. Yes. Selena, 9/11. That was the day, I don't know about you, Selena, but it was the day I realized the world was changing and I stopped working as a therapist, decided to stop working as a therapist and start storytelling full time because
Wow.
I wanted the stories.
Wow.
They were important to me.
Yeah.
Yet, Vivica puts up, tragedies seem to have stuck in my memory. Yeah, yeah. When you look at so much of history is the history of the tragedies, and what often gets lost are the moments of happiness, the moments of joy, the moments of exhilaration. Uh, they tend to get lost. Okay. The JFK assassination. Yeah, Frankie in Colorado. Yes, that was a huge moment. And I think anybody who was alive at that point, you probably remember what you were doing when you heard that Kennedy had been shot. I have that memory as just still sharp in my mind when a, a person, a friend told me about the assassination. Yeah, and Selena puts up, unfortunately, the feel-good stories are not usually newsworthy today. Okay. Well, think about the questions that are up here too. Why is this story or period important to you? Think about why does it stick with you? And is it something you might want to tell? And if so, to what kind of audience? More comments. Unfortunately, the feel-good stories are not usually newsworthy today. Yeah, maybe even, I mean, the news thrives on blood and thunder and gunshots and turmoil. The world now has been, you almost feel like it's been created for CNN and Fox News or whatever your news source is, wherever you are. It also feels like it's not been created to be preserved in print anymore, or even orally. It's all visual. Moira, a story of of a great personality from Munich history, a children's doctor, how he survived 1938 and further, and came back after the end of the war. Moira, you have done a story in 2 sentences, and it makes me want to hear more. But it's a beautiful, I mean, just that is a little gem in itself. And I just want to hear the rest of it. And I hope that's the story that you brought with you to maybe think about expanding on today. And did anybody else do that? Have you got a story or a historical story idea you'd like to maybe do something with at some point? I'm not going to live long enough to do the stories I'd like to work on, and that's okay. But what about other folks? Which ones might you want to work on?
If I could say, I'm wanting to work on some family history stories
Uh-huh.
from my Reed family because I'm meeting with my brother later today to plan a family reunion, and there's a lot of interesting history about the Reed family and where they came from and how they moved out here to Colorado and all the in between. So that's one that I'm thinking of right now and working on.
Yeah, I would really encourage that. When I started doing stories and storytelling, I knew almost nothing about my family. And every time I dig, I hit some sort of a vein of something that I can follow. And as I understand my family more, I understand the times they lived in, and I understand myself and my current family a little better. Yeah, I I would really encourage to dig at that. Now we've got some really good tools to use to dig back for information. I just got a lead on a cousin, and about a month ago went up to New York City and met with two cousins I haven't seen in over 80 years. And we spent the day together, and I came back and I was just loaded with nothing else, loaded with material I could use. And I think the same thing will happen to you. Vivica puts down, tragedies seem to unite humans. That's the only part of the tragic stories I would want to share. Yes. And that feeling of shared experience, it's so fragile sometimes, and it goes so fast. I forget who put up, Selena put up about 9/11 in the States after 9, for about a month after 9/11, maybe a little longer, maybe a little shorter. The country was united in a way you hadn't seen since the 19 World War II days in the 1940s. And it was so fleeting. 24-hour a day news. They don't live on what's happened in the past. They're pushing new stuff at us all the time. So we're the ones that have to capture that moment of shared experience. Well, hang on to, you know, what stories you may want to work on, and let me get into a little bit some of this. This is how I do it, and there are probably a thousand other ways to do it, but this works for me. And if one piece of it works for you, we've done it. We're doing okay. Can I get the next slide, Eric? Please. All right, so we're going to work on look at research. How do you researching a historical story? How to begin shape what elements? How do you shape it? And then how do you bring it to life? How does it come to life? Um, I think I think anybody not know what the photograph is that's up with this and the story it tells.
That's Tiananmen Square.
That's Tiananmen Square on June, I forget, 4th or 5th. The photograph was taken by an American journalist, Jeff Widener. I think I'm saying it correctly. And he was either on the roof of a building or in his hotel. And he's taking a picture of a man standing in front of a line of tanks.
A
And
student.
this is, pardon?
A student. Wasn't it a student?
A student, yes. Thank you. I probably got his name somewhere. And this is that week when the Chinese government turns its army against its own people. And Tiananmen Square in Peking, Beijing, becomes kind of the center point of this. And people are literally lying in the streets dead. And they bring in the heavy armor. And this young man is standing in front of this line of tanks. Now, this is a rich picture. It tells a story, uh, and it's a good story to tell. But there's also some distortion in that, and as you're researching your material, keep in mind that there's going to be um, the reality is going to be distorted. It's going to be sometimes you're going to look at a photograph like this and think you've got the story, and it may not be quite what you think it is. You'll read an account that really sounds accurate. And maybe when you dig into it, you find out it isn't what you think it's going to be. Um, Anybody know what the sort of historical inaccuracy in this photograph is? Okay. Um, I think I assumed when I first saw this, it's a powerful photograph, and um, but I thought the story was, here's this young man putting his body in the way. One man, one person, and a young man stopping what is four steel tanks from coming into the park and creating more havoc. When the reality is those tanks are leaving. The government had ordered them to leave the area, and they are leaving. It's just a caution, and I love to use photographs as material to learn to get into the period, the situation, whatever. I love using photographs, and we'll talk a lot about that. But we got to be careful when we're using them, and sometimes have to dig for, what's the truth. And it may not matter to my story, but I want to know I'd like to know what it is anyway. When we approach telling historical stories, I think it helps to think like a journalist. I guess they still teach in journalism school the 5 W's of journalism. What's the who? Who's involved? What's happening? When is it happening? Where is it happening? And most important, why is it happening? Who, what, when, where, why. You cannot go wrong digging into those 5 W's. And if you keep them in mind as you're working on your story, it'll be the difference between doing a fictional story versus one that's not so fictional. Or if you're doing a fictional story, that your fictional story has historical accuracy. Okay. Can we get the next slide, Eric, please? Thank you. So some of the key elements of historical storytelling, accuracy and credibility. Yeah, let me get my notes. Focus that the narrative has got to be focused. Too much of how we teach history is just dates and the timeline. That's never the human story. Well, that's only maybe part of the skeleton of the human story. Um, and if we're going into history, it's our job to be as accurate as we can. The narrative should be focused. And because it's a story, we have to have characters, conflict, and something at stake. Our job is to create, one of our jobs is to create pictures with words, sharp, vivid pictures. These are the life-bringing moments. And again, think about compelling historical stories for you. What are they and what's making them compelling? I ran across this photograph a few years ago, and it was always just kind of a wonderful photograph. I thought we're looking at 5 samurai warriors. And if you look closely, they're sitting in some sort of an enclosed space, and they're fully armed. They're carrying their 2 swords. I think that's called daisho, is the 2 swords. They're in traditional garb. They're wearing top knots, that knot of hair. The kimonos probably made of fine silk, and they're carrying their arms. And I always thought there's a story here, and somebody needs to tell it. And I still think it needs to be told. This is a story that dates back to 1860 in the United States, just before the start of the American Civil War. In 2 years previously, the United States and Japan had signed their first treaty together. And this was the treaty that opened up Japanese ports to Western trade. And effectively, it ended hundreds of years of Japanese isolation. And again, another good place to look for stories if you want to do that story. Um, the Japanese do not sign this treaty just because they want to, and they're anxious to have American Yankee ingenuity materials. Their ports were full of American gunboats, and which, history. If you think history doesn't repeat itself. Well, the treaty is signed, and here we are. And the leadership in Japan sends, for its day, a huge delegation of samurai to the United States to formally ratify the treaty, and it marks the first Japanese diplomatic mission to the United States. And they send upwards of somewhere between 75 and 80 samurai to the States. And there's some other photographs of them in San Francisco, New York City, Washington, D.C., and here they are. And they become huge celebrities in the States. I mean, they are the rock stars of their day. Everybody wants to see them. Everybody wants to touch their clothes and da 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 da. When they're in their as they process, and it is a procession through New York City and Washington, D.C., they are mobbed. Thousands of people come out to see them. And here are five of them posed. At first glance, looks like a jail cell, but I think it's some sort of a photographer set up in a day when you had to sit still for probably 5 minutes to take your story. But wouldn't it be a great story if one of you uh, tells us the story of one of these samurai and what his experience was? And here's a story that is waiting to be told and will be a compelling story. Two histories, two cultures come together, um, and go through, the the era of when, the Western nations think they dominate, when Japan and China rebuild and become powers of their own. Another a bloody war between the Japanese and the Russians in 1905, and then this god-awful war between us and the Japanese in the 1940s. And then, at least until now, a long era of peace and partnership. So goes all over the place, but it's a wonderful story. And when we come back next year to this festival, I'd love to have see somebody, one of you, uh, maybe turn this into a story. Can we get the next slide, Eric, please? Thank you. Okay. Here's Wendy Robinson, who's an essayist and a novelist, has given us something to think about. We discover a richer, more vibrant, beautifully textured truth about who we are when we give ourselves permission to engage with a broader range of stories. Not just stories that affirm or reify what we already think to be true, but stories that challenge, complicate, and reframe and extend our truths. Here is a picture, another picture that tells a story and could lead us into a story. What do you see? Looks like a picture of the front or the outside looking in of a vegetable or a grocery store. Beautiful piles of produce sitting there. In this particular picture, if you look closely, um, oh, you can't see my arrow. Up in the upper left-hand side of the picture, you can see the reflection of the store owner, and down below him, his family. There's a sign in the middle right that says, "We invite." Don't even pay attention to the prices. They'll just make you sick. They seem so cheap to us. But there's this sign, "We invite." I invite you, when you're doing your research for stories, to look closely, to look very, very closely. Um, uh, you know, we're all, we live in an era of visual literacy, the ability to read and use images, to us as storytellers to recreate images as words, as sounds. Um, and and we bring to our work a curiosity. My curiosity with this picture brought me to look at that "We invite" sign very closely. Actually looked at it. I blew the picture up, and it's an old picture, so it's kind of fuzzy. It was actually taken in Canada, in Western Canada. I forget, maybe Vancouver, of a grocery store. But I looked closely. I wanted to use the picture just to get a sense of feeling. The story I referred to earlier about my grandmother and going shopping with her. This was the kind of shop we went to. So I was looking at pictures of shops. I want, well, what was there? What was the produce? How was it arranged? And I looked at vegetable stores and meat store, fish stores, all of them. This picture I'm looking at, I'm mostly interested in the vegetables and the prices. That was important. But the sign, "We invite," and I looked at that very closely. And what it's invite, I thought it was an invite to come in, take look at all the beautiful produce, the great prices, da 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 da. That's what I thought that invitation was. When I looked closely, the invitation was inviting only white customers. And it goes on to say something about we basically do not sell to non-white human beings. Do not come in here. So what looks like a welcoming um, to a lot of people would not have been that. And which changes the story. It got me thinking, my the where one of the shopping areas where my grandmother and I in the Bronx in New York City would go, on the same block, there were shops that would not sell to Jewish people. There were shops that only sold to Italians. When I came down to Richmond, Virginia in the mid 1960s, everywhere I looked were signs, "Whites only, colored do not enter," or "Enter here," or do not use this water fountain." And this stuff was all around. And if I'm telling stories about this era, and in my head, when I think about the time when I lived with my grandmother in between the late 1930s and early mid 1940s, it was such a beautiful time to me in many ways, but it was also an ugly time. And most times have an element of both. And we're living in one of that moments right now. And our stories, we want our stories to reflect this. And it's going to it could take you into some difficult places, and it's going to take you into some really hard places. And I think that will be true no matter what era you're choosing to tell your stories to. The picture about the sailor grabbing a young woman right on the street, holding her close and kissing. On one hand, it tells this story. On the other hand, it tells that story. 9/11, kind of in a way, very similar. Um, okay, next slide, please. When be warned, ye who enter here, and I don't remember where I got this quote from. I think it came from an article I found. Be warned, ye who enter here, the historical novel can be dangerous territory. If you love history, it's easy to get happily lost in research and never be heard from again. I don't know about any of you that do stories from history, but what a rabbit hole. I mean, it's not just it's a field of rabbit holes, and so easy to go down when you go down to not come back. So how do we focus ourselves? And this would sort of be my process on although sometimes I can't say I use every one of these steps, and we'll probably just as often we'll begin with start with one and jump to six. But these are steps to keep in mind as you're shaping a story. Beginning with the big picture. For me, to get an overview of a time is I'll start reading articles, might be books. I'll look at general history texts. I like looking at children's books. If you're brand new to a period, um, children's books are great. They're simple, they're basic, and they're loaded with pictures, which give you a sense of the time. Um, so I will start with that sort of thing. And as I get into it, I'm going to focus more on what was everyday life like and start looking at social histories, focusing on books with titles like Everyday Life in or a social history of whatever. Um, and I'm looking here for the nitty gritty details of everyday life that are going to help my listener feel like they're there. Again, when I talk about going on a shopping trip with my grandmother for the ingredients for a Sabbath meal, I spend a lot of time talking about what Bathgate Avenue in the Bronx, which was an area, a street with lined on both sides of the street, small shops, all their doors open, signs up on the windows with what they got for sale in a multitude of languages, the streets packed with vendors, push carts, wagons, tables full of stuff, vegetables, meats, even religious items and clothing. I spend a lot of time on what it smelled like because my story, going with my grandma in like 1940, it was after my grandfather. So like, let's say 1941, 42. Um, this was the undeodorized world at that point, and people weren't rolling on deodorant every morning. They might splash on perfume, and the smells. And smells are such an old sense. Our sensory organs are so kind of so primitive in a way, but they're good. And when I got into the smells, for me it made the whole block come alive. And I can then describe those smells to the audience, and it sort of, brings us, we're all walking down the street together, smelling, smelling rotten meat and fish and chicken feathers and vegetables from very fresh to rotting, with the smell of old books, old clothing, the people themselves, tobacco smoke everywhere, the exhaust from the vehicles, and that just brings you right into it. When I'm overloaded with material, I start thinking about how to organize it. I'll start wondering, also at this point, I want to start thinking about words and names. If I'm going to name characters, I want to use names that were used in that period. And names change all the time. I don't know about any of you who work in public schools now. I go into a schoolroom right now, and half the children in the room I'm in or in the assembly have got names that I never heard used before. When I was there, nobody was named that. We all had a very different set of, and you want to get that right. You want to get the names of things right, words that are used when you're creating characters and dialogue. You want your dialogue to be authentic. I find here it's a good idea to keep track of my research materials. I'll collect stuff and then not remember where I got it from, and I can't get back to it. It's so frustrating. Like I said before, pictures are worth 1,000 words. I spend a lot of time looking at pictures or paintings or drawings, whatever, of the time period I'm working on. I'm working now on what I hope will be a one-man show that I'm actually going to do this summer on um, stories from the Holocaust, and in particular, Hasidic stories of the Holocaust. And right now, I'm looking at prisoner art from the camps, and I'm looking at photographs taken by their captors. And it's giving me just a sense. Sometimes I come out of a session of looking at photographs, and I feel almost like I've spent an afternoon in a camp, but it makes it real to me, and I can understand the stories I'm working on. I understand better. At some point, I'm going to need to know specifics, and I want to list what those specifics are. I've probably by now got enough material. If I'm working on one story, I probably have enough material for 6 or 8 or 10 or 12. And that's going to happen. And I need to start narrowing it down, um, narrowing it and editing and keeping it down and looking for my starting point. When I'm working on where is this story going to start for me? Uh, I'm going to highlight the most important items on my list, and I like putting them on Post-its, and then kind of laying out my Post-its, and going through that. And I want to flag in periodicals and books specific chapters, pages, articles that I'm going to come back to. I have to be careful not to overload myself. So it's a lot. Some days it's if I'm working on a project, it's a good idea to just stick with one topic for that day and not take on any more. And I will come across fascinating stuff. I mean, that's the problem. One of the problems of digging into history, it's all fascinating, and you're going to keep finding this stuff. So I'll often will put on a post-it or in my story notebook, just a note for more on the Pony Express. See such and such page, and such and such book. So if I do go back to it or want to go back to it, I know where to go. One of the hard things for me is that item number 7. When have I done enough? It's a lot easier to do the research than to create the story. So when have I done enough is a real hard one. For me, it becomes enough when the characters I'm thinking about using, the settings, the plot line start becoming real to me and vivid in a way that I feel like I'm ready to capture them. I wish I had a something technical or specific here, but I don't know that there is that point. But to me, it's when it becomes real and so vivid, then I know it's time to start. I'm still going to have things I'm going to need to research, and I'll keep a sort of a running list of things that will pop up along the way that I may want to look up later. And I'll usually wait till after I've done my first draft uh, to do that kind of research. And then when I do have the first draft, and this is, again is really hard for me. I don't know about you. My words are my little purple darlings. My kids, my grown-up kids, my grandchildren would probably tell you that I care more about words than I care about them. I don't think that's true, but they're not far off. And this thing about eliminating anything extraneous to your story and the story I'm going to tell, I can't tell it all. You just can't do it. So eliminating the extraneous has to begin really you really have to be doing it at this point with the first draft. And I think the longer I wait to start doing that the more attached I am to the words and the harder it is to do. Can we get the next slide, please, Eric? So this is kind of I want to go back on it, kind of again, repeating and shaping the story. Um, like I said, I study old pictures, old movies, and videos and films are good to look at along with still pictures. I did a one-man show a few years ago for the National Storytelling Network Fringe Festival, and I did a show on being a teenager in Greenwich Village in New York City. And I had a few stories, I had stuff because that's where I spent a lot of time as a teenager in the 1950s, and it was a good time to be there. But I wanted to really get the sense of what was it like? What was the experience, the felt experience of being there? And I started, again, I collected hundreds of photographs, film, lots of people with experimenting with film then, and just immersed myself in them. I even found, I wish I'd been smart enough to put it up here. I even found online somewhere an old photograph I was in. Somebody had taken a picture in a bar, or a Greenwich Village bar, or coffee house, and I'm there. I'm look like I'm hugging a jukebox or something and holding a glass of something I was probably too young to be drinking, but there I am. And that's how I looked when I was in 1955 or 56. It was amazing. But and looking at these old evocative pictures just brought me there. And there are wonderful places to find pictures. I don't know where you go in India. I should have looked it up and I didn't. For example, for photo archives in the States, New York Public Library has a huge collection of photographs. The U.S. Library of Congress, as long as we still have that, is full. There's an archive, somebody who's here from Colorado, the University of Denver has the Beck Archive, which is also a repository for a lot of materials on Native Americans and a lot of illustrative materials. I think you got to get wherever possible, walk the ground. I was doing a story a few years ago on Gettysburg and the Maine the troops from the state of Maine who basically stopped the Confederates' last and best attempts, one of their last and best attempts to win that battle. And I went to I had to go to Gettysburg, and I spent 2 or 3 days walking up and down the hill where this fight took place. At at one point in the story, the Maine troops are out of ammunition, and their commander, General Chamberlain, um, tells them to fix bayonets, and they charge down the hill at a at the Confederate troops, who greatly outnumber them at this point, and they just screaming like crazy charge down the hill. And I found myself picking up a stick and racing down that hill myself. And I did it several times and kept falling because it's a rocky, rocky little hill. And how did they keep their footing? But it gave me such a sense of what that was like. Later on, I did it in reverse. Um, the last big Confederate charge at Gettysburg was General Pickett sending his troops to what he knew was probably their, and he was right, to their death. And they charged uphill across an open field. And I ran that field. And I had to do it several times. And gee, it was a long way to run. And again, but that's what I had to do to get into the feeling of what this was like, to make it live. Somebody, whoever Samsung SM something is, or hi, has put up, we have, and I hope I'm pronouncing this right, the Tamil Nadu archives, which is that in Chennai. And then this person also reminds us there are photographers who are collectors, and there's so many books of pictures. And you may have if you're doing family stories, somebody put up they were working on family stories. Your family pictures will tell you volumes. Reading old books, old newspapers, um, looking at old original documents is really helpful. I find visiting museums sometimes really helpful on if there's a museum that's got a collection or something on something I'm interested in. It's okay to read history books about a time or a place, but it's really important to read materials from the period um, to get a sense of attitude and language. And even if it informs just a gesture you make or a phrase you turn, it'll be worth it. Museum exhibits can suggest settings and details that might enrich your story. It's also museums can sometimes be sources of people who will tell you things. My grandson and I were on a researching trip. When I was in the U.S. Army, I was stationed at a military base in North Carolina, Fort Bragg. Well, I worked there. I was really never stationed there, but I worked there a lot. And I worked with a specific group of soldiers doing a specific task. And it was interesting. And 20 or 30 years later, I wanted to do some stories about it. And we went back to that base, went to the museum and going through and looking at stuff. And I one of the museum docents asked me what we were doing, and I told him, and maybe because it was an army base, I swear within 20 minutes there was a retired sergeant, army sergeant, standing in front of me in uniform who had been there when I was there around that time. And we spent the rest of the afternoon, my grandson and I, listening to his stories. And he made that time. I mean, I had my own experience, but to hear it from his mouth, it made that time come alive. And it became a treasured moment. Okay, Eric, let's move to number 8. Okay, in shaping, I think, and I'll have, I think there are 12 points I want to make, and we're up to number, what, 5. You got to start with a good story. Um, and either you're going to find something in your research, or your memory may inspire something original that you will set in a particular time and place. I suggest, and you're going to come across many different kinds of stories, and then you got to pick and choose. I would start with something simple. The story with my grandmother, I started the simple fact of her buying every Thursday afternoon, going out to buy the supplies for her weekend Sabbath cooking. Didn't get much simpler than that. And we went from there. Um, and I think it just keep it simple and progress. You can always move to more, and you will move to more complex things as your story and your experience grows. This is a good place to put in where if you're taking material from somebody else, some other source, make sure you try to find a way to give credit to sources. I think that's something. It's easy to get lost when you're in the flow of stories, but it's a good thing. It's a good habit to get into. Adapting your story to the audience. When I'm telling family stories to children, going to be very different than telling family stories to somebody else. The same with historical stories. It really depends on the audience. Uh, the set of stories I'm working on these Holocaust stories, at this point, are aimed at a very mature audience. And I can I can put in more detail than with a different kind of audience. Uh, Somebody just put up something I want to get into. Well, let me get through this, and Selena put up something. I'll come back to you, Selena. Um, Keeping it simple, close to you. And one thing I like to keep them, and this has been drilled into my head by so many people that have taught me storytelling, is to stimulate the senses. To don't forget the sensory senses: smell, sight, sound, taste, feel. These are the elements that stimulate the audience's memories and imaginations and help keep things alive. I think nowadays, this is probably a good place to say this, attention spans are becoming shorter and shorter and more demanding. I saw something yesterday. It was something about our attention span for material now is under 80 seconds. And we're going to look, and we're overloaded and going to look for something else. that's not a lot of attention span, but that's what we're working with. And I think it makes our job as storytellers more difficult. And for those of you who do story slams, I mean, they're asking for shorter and shorter stories often. And for their audiences, they're probably right. They're younger audiences, and they don't want to sit still for a 15 or a 20-minute story. And in some ways, we as storytellers, we have to educate people. I know if you do schoolwork, you probably know this with children. You have to educate children often how to listen to a story because they don't know. The teachers don't know. My storytelling partner and I do a lot of work in libraries. Librarians often don't know much, if anything, about storytelling and about how to really, really listen. I think that's probably, it's not the fault of them, it's the fault of our world and of the way we're used to dealing with media and probably the way we do with education. So I think our storytelling skills, maybe most particularly with historical stories, but maybe with any, they have to be really strong to lock in attention. As you go through this festival over these weekends, you know, pay attention. Which storytellers are you paying most attention? Are you paying most attention to? Who's holding your attention the best? What are they doing to hold your attention? And I think that's one of the reasons we come to these festivals is we can learn that way. And then finally, again, keep the storyline brief and simple as you can. Keep your story close to you as you can. Keep it as close as you can to your audience and work on stimulating their senses. Um, visual, create vivid pictures as much as you can. And when telling to mixed ages, which is going to happen when you tell to a mixed group, aim the story at the younger ones. It's the contact, because it's the contact between you and the listeners that's going to make your story come alive. The younger ones are following, the elders will too. And maybe take a moment now to think about um, how do you maintain contact with listeners? I don't know if you follow much with stand-up comedians, but there's a thing in stand-up comedy nowadays, which sometimes gets annoying to me, but they're dealing directly with the audience more. They're not just standing up there telling jokes. They're challenging the audience, talking to the audience, picking out people to talk to, um, throwing out something they know is going to get a reaction from the audience, even if it's not part of their joke telling. And I think they're good people to take a look at as we learn how to maintain contact. Okay. Um, Anybody has anything to say? Jump in. It's boring hearing this, just the sound of my old voice. Selena's chat note is, I think you need to look at. In 2014, I created and told a story about my grandfather's route to Canada when he left his hometown of Polonoy, which I think is in Poland, maybe, and his
It, it always
what?
changed borders, so I'm not 100%, it's not
Yeah,
accurate.
that was a problem our folks had, didn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
whoever won the last battle, that was the country you were in. His travels as a peddler in Quebec. Yeah, I have a similar story or a similar history of my people being peddlers. During the pandemic, I received a ship manifesto and later pieced together more once I began to look at his passport that wasn't in my possession when I first crafted the story. Over time, the story has grown. Yeah, they have a way of doing that. And
Yeah,
go ahead.
Can I just add one more thing based
You
on
can
what you were
add if you
saying?
want.
Is that the late Doug Lipman, he had said
Ah,
that in order to um, really bring your story to life, you should tell it at least 14 different times to different people and get their reactions and see what, how you feel about the whole thing. And I have to say that I did exactly that. But the first time I told it at our guild, Montreal Storytellers Guild, I had ended the story really quite abruptly, and I was very proud of the way I ended it. And all of a sudden, everybody just leaned in towards me, and I looked at them and I said, "Oh, I guess you didn't like that ending." And they went, "No, we want to know more about Sam," which was the name of my grandfather. And at that point, my grandfather had already passed, but I went home and I asked my dad, like, what else is there? No, 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 no. And by the time I told it, and a few people who heard it in Montreal, then heard it in Summerside, PEI,
mhm.
and they just loved the way, it just came to life. So I think all those things are incredible, and I'm really enjoying your session.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Ah, God, you put so much there. Uh, well, I think what you're saying is probably more important than my slides.
No,
Um,
no.
the piece about getting his passport and seeing the ship manifest
Yeah.
um, is so important. I think I mentioned at the beginning, I just had a reunion with two cousins I hadn't seen in 80 years. One of them um, had gotten my mother's death certificate, which I had never seen before. I've never seen an accurate one before. And this was the original death certificate, a copy of the original death certificate. My mom died when I was born and
Right.
started a whole, I mean, there's no place, a whole mess. I just turned my life up, so made my life just, well, what it is. But there was her death certificate, and it told the truth of her death. I didn't
Well,
know it. I had never been told the exact truth before. Everybody had a different story or lied. I'd never, holding that piece of paper in my hand
that's
was,
incredible.
was incredible. The only thing I have of my mother's, and I keep it on my desk, I don't even know if you can see it, is, is her compact. My grandmother took it from the hospital when my mother died. And I was like in my 20s before she gave this to me. And it's all I have. This and the death certificate is all I have of her. And yet, when I hold these in my hand and I look at them, the stories come. The stories just come. And I think it's as much of this original paperwork you can get your hands on and look at. Sometimes you have to go to like a state library or something to get the archives. It's worth it. Okay, we're going to run out of time, so let me on this slide, the picture again is going to be there's a story there one of you ought to tell. That picture, you know, a big ocean liner, and then there's it looks like a rowboat, probably a motorboat off in the corner. Anybody have any idea what that is? That's the last picture of the Lusitania.
Oh,
And it's sailing from England to the United States, I think. And I think in the little motorboat are the pilots who guide the ship out into the ocean from the port. And this ship goes on to be sunk by a German submarine. Um, and again, it's a gift. There's a great story there for somebody, and it'll get you into a big festival when you do that story. I want to get to item 12 here. I think that's important. The risk of critical misunderstanding of history the risk of critical misunderstanding and the corollary to that is history's contentious and probably getting more so. So Eric, can you get to slide 10? There's no such thing as impartial history. And I think we're in the middle of an era now where, I mean, I can't imagine the number of PhD dissertations that are going to be flooding us and books and things about the time we're living in now. Um, and mostly what we're going to get, everybody has a point of view and everybody's got an argument, and you'll have a point of view in your stories too. That's okay. Just remember that none of it's really totally impartial. The chief problem is it's not that people are lying, it's omissions or de-emphasis of data that may or may not be important. And then the definition of what's important, well, that depends on, it depends, as they say. Um, Walker Percy, great late novelist, once argued that literature, especially fictional stories, they portray a clearer and probably more cohesive picture of the human condition than any of the social sciences, including history. I don't know, it'd be interesting if I could see, all I can see is the slide, basically. I can't see the screen. But if I say, how many of you had a really, really good history teacher in fifth or sixth grade? Raise your hand. Eric, how many hands are raised? I'm asking, how many of you, thank you. How many hands are raised? I had a good history teacher in seventh grade, but never before that. And I don't see any hands raised. I can't tell with the people whose picture, I'm not seeing them live. But with history, I don't know, I wonder why they teach it to us. Here in Virginia, my kids grew up learning that the Confederacy won the Civil War, basically, that white people are superior to everybody else, that George Washington never told a lie, um, and none of the good stuff, none of the really, really good stuff. And yet history is so juicy. So and stories are the way we change it and we make it three-dimensional and sensory. This is how and we're the ones that do it. Um, Viewing history as a story and teaching it as, and teaching, maybe just teaching the subject of storytelling, which is what we could do, is the way to go. Do you have your hand up, Frankie? Okay, I can see the audience now. Um, story Stories are metaphor. The use of metaphor lends depth and richness and accuracy to what we're telling. I think nowadays we got to be careful, or at least be aware you're liable to get pushback on a lot of historical subjects, and the pushback can be hard. I did I actually did a workshop here, I think last year, on political storytelling. And I did that as a multi-course thing where I teach at a senior center, learning center for seniors, and I did like a year, half a year on political storytelling and political comedy. At one point, when I went through why, in America at least, one side's comedy was funnier than the other, just as comedy, just as comedy. A policeman in the group wanted to arrest me. literally out of his seat, pushing me against the podium and wishing he had his handcuffs so he could arrest me. Um, and that's not the first time something like that's happened. Sometimes you're going to get we're so reactive. And I don't know what it's like where you are, but Americans now think we have the right to react in any way we want. And the history we don't believe, if we don't believe the history you're telling, you're going to get pushback, which to me is all the more reason to do it and why we need to do it and let them push back. But you're going to take some risks. I want to be careful where I teach, for example. I don't care what they're not going to do. What are they going to do to me? I mean, geez, I'm almost 90 years old. What are they going to do to me? But I worry about the administration of the school and their funding. I have to think about that. And I still have their permission to go where I need to go, which is okay. Janet Mintz put up something. Uh, the Center for Civil War Photography here in our country has a great collection of 3D photos that you can view online using the right glasses. Yes, they do. They also have a great collection of prints from glass negatives that have been restored beautifully. I'm blanking on the name of the ranger who did the restoration here in Virginia, but they're great photographs, and you can learn so much from them. Some of those photographs are so clear. When you look at the walls behind the characters, you can read the graffiti. You can read the medals that soldiers are wearing. They're great pictures. I have a story about that. I've run out of time. I can't tell you, but it was a punishment. I was punished once in the army, and my punishment was I had to spend 2 months cleaning up a bunch of those glass negatives that Janet's writing about that are now at the Civil War photography website. Yes, ma'am, Moira. And Eric, will you just let me cut us off when we need to stop? He's muted, but he got the answer.
We can
Moira,
we can stop anytime.
okay, Moira had a
Is,
question.
is it okay to ask a question?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
You
always been
mentioned
okay.
political storytelling and that you did a workshop. Was it here in the festival? So is there a recording?
There must be.
Okay,
What,
so
last year?
Yeah. Isn't that what I did last year?
how could I miss that? Okay, thank
I'll
you.
I'll look for it, Myra.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I did it
thanks.
in several places, and
I
I think I did it here.
I'd
Yeah,
be interested
because
too.
I was worried doing it here, Eric,
Why?
because I was afraid that one of the participants might say something, or there'd be some sort of pushback on you and your school and your program, because you can't be sure nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
mm, yeah.
And Moira,
Actually, that's something in relation actually to political storytelling because I'm asking myself when does history begin and when is it political? You know, if we're talking times of the Second World War, it's sort of the kind of interface because actually you started with what's going. I also first thing in the morning put on the news. And I once had, I tried to make that short, but it's important for me to get your opinion on that. I once went to a very good lecture about the Middle East conflict and so on. And there was the usual audience who took sides, and of course, they knew exactly who was to blame, who was the goody and the baddie. And Yeah, and when I got a chance to speak, I said, while we're sitting here in Jerusalem, there's the first big conference of 2 days from all the uh, from all the peace initiatives in the area with participants from both sides who fight for peace and for solutions. Sorry, I'm getting a bit emotional because that's the point where I'm not against something, but this is, I don't want to hear anymore who caused what and who is to blame, but what works. And even if it's not a huge number of people and they don't seem to make a difference, they do a wonderful job against all resistance and with all the reasons in the world just to hate the other side and to want to destroy it. So for me, that's a story, and nobody was interested. They were interested in discussion and everything. Peace conference, yeah, so what? Okay, now let's continue shouting at each other. And I really wonder, I watch a lot, I read a lot. I know many of the stories of the activists from both sides, and I think they're exciting and they need to be told. On the other side, what you say about the pushbacks and so on, of course, that can become quite controversial, but it's a pity not to hear a story. Well, this is working. This is how it works. There's a lot to learn from it. Sorry.
No, no, I think you're saying it far better than I could. Yeah, we live, the curse of living in interesting times,
Yeah.
and living in a world that seems to be in many places moving back uh, I, I, to an anti-democratic world.
Yeah,
At
and
least a
we here
world
in
where
Germany,
it's hard to be democratic.
yeah,
And
we just celebrated, the end of last year, the end of World War II, and America brought us freedom and democracy. And oh yeah, what I would like to hear from you is, do you think there's any point in trying to tell these stories, or would one just be preaching to the choir, or just give it a try, maybe?
I would, yeah, that's a hard question. To me, I'm going to tell the stories no matter what. If it's just me alone in the room, I'll do it. And there's something to be said for putting, especially in these days of electronic recording, there's something to be said just for getting the message out there. You don't know. It might be 100 years from now, somebody will stumble upon a recording of your story and it might make the difference. Or somebody by accident may hear what you have to say and it makes a difference to them. I think it
Thank
makes a
you so
difference
much.
to us
Yeah.
to be courageous enough to keep telling our stories. And whether you and we can tell the truth. We tell the truth through history. We tell the truth through folk tales. We tell the truth through fairy tales. We tell the truth through fiction. I mean, there's so many ways to tell the truth, and we just got to be smart on how we do it. One little advantage we have is some of the people who are opposed, they're not smart. Power doesn't make you smart. A gun in your hand doesn't really make you smart. Killing me or shutting me up doesn't mean you're smart in doing it. And we do it anyway.
A lot.
Don't stop. Don't stop. Eric Eric is so good. I need Eric in my life. I want you, if you had if you were helping me work my life, I'd be in great shape. Thank you. And thank you, Eric. I think the previous speaker says, I think I heard Nico say it also. For the work you do, you are a blessing. You are a blessing to our world. You really,
Thank you so
really.
much.
I don't know how you do it, but just keep it up. Somebody said a word about, Selena, about Doug Lippman, great American storyteller who died just a few weeks ago. And for so many of us, was one of the best, a great storyteller, maybe an even better storytelling teacher who taught several generations of us how to get up there and tell us a story.
Mhm.
So
Thank you,
true.
Eric.
Thank
I'm
you.
good stuff.
Okay, let's stop the recording.